Good day, I'm Nicole Scritari together with Miss Ahok and Mr. Miliado. So our report is all about the theory of Hans J. Eysenck, the biologically based factor theory. Before we talk more about the theory of Hans Eysenck, let us get to know him first. So Hans J. Eysenck was born in Berlin on March 4, 1916. When he was 4 years old, nag-divorce iyang parents, and because of that, he lived with his maternal grandmother, and he grew up with little parental discipline and a few strict control over his behavior because wala man iyang parents na maka gabay sa iya, makadisiplin sa iya. And tapos iya pong grandmother is gina-tolerate, gina-spoil lang niya si Hans Eysenck nga. Natay time na nag-ingon si Hans Eysenck yung grandmother na mag-buy daw siya cigarette. Nag-expect si Hans Eysenck na badlungon siya sa iyang grandmother. Instead, ang gibuhat sa iyang grandmother kay ingon siya kung ganahan kag kung gusto na ni mo then go. Unsay gusto ni Hans Eysenck, gina-tolerate ra po sa iyang grandmother. When he was 18 years old, he left his native country, Germany, consequence of Nazi tyranny, and he eventually settled in England. So, when he was 18 years old, nag-decide siya nga to study physics. However, katong nga time, naay war sa ilahang country or other country. Tapos, naay gikuan sa offer sa iya nga, ipa-study do siya physics, pero, ang kapalit is, mag-serve siya sa country, like, makipag-away po siya atong murag, something, himo po siyang army sa iyang country. So, di man siya ganahan, di man siya gusto ka ng samok. So, iyang gibuhat is, ni-move siya sa England. Dito sa England is, he took an examination, entrance examination. Tapos, di ba sa entrance examination, kay na may different subject nga kanang imong i-take. Tapos, dito sa different subject, kung good kag math, kung dako kag score sa math, pwede kag engineering. Tapos, ang iyahang score manggod kay, dili siya bitaw fit sa course nga physics. So, giingnan siya sa in charge atong entrance examination nga. Dili siya pwede mag-physics kay, dili siya fit to take a physics course. Ang iyang gibuhat kay nangutana siya kung unsa nga ang course nga iyahang pwede sudlan, instead nga maghulat pa siya isa ka tuig para mag-entrance examination sa dutro. Ang iyang lang gibuhat kay nangutana lang siya unsa iyang course nga pwede sudlan, unsa iyang course nga napasaran kanang fit sa iya. So niingon tong in charge nga psychology daw kuno. Tapos napangutana niya sa Eysenck, what the hell is psychology? Wa gid siya kabalo kung unsa gid ang psychology that time. Tapos ang iyang gibuhat kay wala man siya choice, kay instead mag-wait pa siya another year para mag-take na sad. So i-wait na siya, di ang iyang gibuhat ni sulod na lang siya sa psychology without having knowledge about what is really psychology. In 1938, he received his bachelor degree and at the same time married Margaret Davis, a Canadian with a degree in mathematician. In 1940, he was awarded a PhD in University of London, but by this time, England and most European nations were at war. So, because kay German national siya, he is considered an enemy sa kaning England. And he is not allowed to enter the Royal Air Force or any other branch of military. So instead, with no training in clinical psychology, niadala lang siya dito sa military emergency hospital. He worked there treating patients who were suffering from a variety of psychological symptoms, including kanang anxiety, depression, and hysteria. And using factor analysis, he found that the two major personality factors, the neuroticism or emotional stability and extraversion and introversion, could account for all the traditional diagnostic group. And these early theoretical ideas lead to the publication of his first book, which is The Dimension of Personality. After the war, he became director of the psychology department at Maudsley in 1949. And in 1949 to 1950, he spent much of that year traveling throughout the United States and Canada looking over clinical psychology program. Eysenck obtained a divorce from his wife and married Sybil Rustle, a beautiful quantitative psychologist. Eysenck published some 800 journal article or book chapter and more than 75 books. In 1983, he retired as a professor of psychology at the Institute of Psychiatry, University of London, and as a senior psychiatrist at the Maudsley and Bethlehem Royal Hospital. He then served as a professor emeritus at the University of London until his death from cancer on September 4, 1997. Theories state that individual differences in people's personality were biologically based. So, in other words, aspects of personality such as temperament, trait, or predisposition have foundation in biological characteristic of individual. For example, if you have introverted na parents, so more likely introverted po ka. Si Hans J. Eysenck is the way he make his theory is he used the confirmatory factor analysis compare kang Cattell nga he used the exploratory factor analysis. So, ang differences between the two is ang exploratory factor analysis is una gi-gather ang data then katong data mo tong basis in making the theory. While ang kaning confirmatory factor analysis is na ay theory maghimo dan og theory then ay sa siya i-test sa other people, i-observe kung katubang theory is kuan bagid siya, legit bagid siya, nga naabagid siya in other people. Then, upon making his theory, nakapropose siya 3 personality trait or 3 dimension of personality, which is the extraversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism. So, kaning tulo is bipolar ni sila, meaning mas spread out sila. Siguro ang uban kay na ay high ang iyang extroversion, ang uban kay low ang extroversion. So more on introverted to nga tao pag low ang extroversion. Ang kanipong neuroticism, pag high daw kang neuroticism kay most likely unstable ka emotionally. Pag low po kang neuroticism is kanang stable ka emotionally. Ang psychoticism pod kay pag high kag psychoticism is more antisocial. Tapos pag low imuhang kuan psychoticism kanang sociable ka. So kaning tulo nga three-dimensional personality, this will be explained more by Ms. Ahok later. The evidence for biologically based personality comes from different sources. The temperament, and secondly, to understand how heredity affect behavior and personality, psychologists turn to science of behavioral genetics. Tapos ikatulo kay brain measure research. So, kaning sa brain measure research, they use 2 technique which is the EEG or the electroencephalography and the fMRI or functional magnetic resonance imaging. Because of this technique nga kaning fMRI o EEG, researcher can see what areas of the brain are using the most oxygen during kanang performing a certain task. So, Eysenck factor theory, the personality theory of Hans Eysenck has strong psychometric and biological component because psychometric alone, according to him, is not enough to explain behavior and personality. And he also added that pag dili daw ma-explain sa personality factor nga nahimo or for example katong 16 personality factor ni Cattell, kung dili daw to niya ma-explain sa 16 personality factor ang isa ka personality sa tao, bisan statistical pa katong mga values nga nakuha is dili gyapon siya enough. It may statistically make sense but theoretically speaking, they doesn't make sense. So because of that, si Hans Eysenck proposed 4 criteria in order to identify kung katubang personality factor nga nahimo sa isa ka theory kay kanang legit ba siya or true. Makaingon ba ta nga valid? Iyahang criteria for identifying factor first is dapat daw na siya psychometric soundness of validity and reliability. So meaning consistency. Then the second one kay heritability, katubang katong mga personality factor kay mamana ba siya na mamana. Third is theoretically it must make sense. And 4, it can predict social phenomena like drug use, mental health disorder, or even diseases. Then pag nasatisfy daw ning 4 criteria, ay sa nata makaingon nga ang personality factor na nagather sa factor analysis kay legit or true. So now let's proceed to the hierarchy of behavior organization. So kani mao ni ang model na ginasunod sa mga trait theory. So as you can see, naa siya specific behavior sa ubos. Ang kaning specific behavior sa ubos, they can correlate or cluster with each other. So for example, you are a kind of person who keep up schoolwork, wake up early in the morning, answer the assignment on time, and review for the quizzes. So if katong nga mga specific behavior kay imo na siyang gina-maintain, then you have the habits of keeping up the schoolworks. Ang kaning habit na keeping up at schoolwork, makorelate pa gid ni siya sa other na habit. For example na pod kani diri sa specific behavior na pod nimo kay free time kay you tend to write solve math problems and you are interested in learning new things, so persistent ka with your hobby. So kana imuhang hobby nga persistent with hobbies kay kuan mo correlate na siya sa kaning keep up the schoolwork ni mga habit na sad. So nanapod kay isa ka habit, for example nga kaning finishes a job, so kaning tulo ka habits nimo kay it can form a trait which is persistence. So basically speaking, ang trait is a collection of habits na nahimo siyang pattern sa atong mga specific behavior. And kanina pod ang mga trait, pwede nila pod nimo siya makorelate sa another na secondary factor. For example, kani social shyness. And mahimo na po na siya og super factor which is introversion. So ang kang katel kay ang ihang 16 PF or 16 personality factor kay naara diri siya naghunong sa traits. Sa second degree na siya ang kang Eysenck kay naa siya sa super factor which is sa pinakataas. So mao to nga ang reason nga nung si Katel kay 16 iyahang personality factor while ang kang kuan ang kang Eysenck kay tulo lang. So kaning hierarchy of behavior organization kay mao ning ginagamit when you are kana bitong taking up personality test. So for example na siya question di ba dito ang kanang kung free time ba di mo kay you are kanang you tend to write ba or solve math problem, then yes or no. Kung yes, then you are persistent with your habits, then mao na siya ang habits. Tapos sa kaning habits mahimo na siyang traits. Sa kaning traits is mato sa super factor. So next ay dimension of personality. So kaning dimension of personality, this will be discussed by Miss Lizelle.
Hey everyone, now let's discuss the dimension of personality of Eysenck biologically based factor theory. Now, many current factors theories maintain that there is sufficient evidence to suggest that almost factor analysis of personality traits will yield 5 general factors, neither more nor less. However, Hans Eysenck, he extracted only 3 general superfactors, and that is factor E for extroversion, factor N for neuroticism, factor P for psychoticism. Now he regarded the 3 factors as part of normal personality structure, and all 3 are bipolar. Now let us try to imagine a pole. At one end of the pole is the extroversion, and at the other end is introversion. Similarly, the neuroticism at one pole and stability at the other. Psychoticism in one pole and the superego at the other. Now, according to Eysenck, each of these elements satisfy his 4 requirements for determining a personality dimension. First, the strong psychometric evidence exists for each. Second, strong biological base exists for each of his 3 superfactors. And third, 3 personality dimension makes sense theoretically. And lastly, repeatedly demonstrated that his 3 factors relate to such social issues, such as drug use, sexual behavior, criminality, preventing cancer, and heart disease and creativity. Now for extroversion, if you remember in chapter 4, Jung explained the extroversion and introversion. Now Eysenck concept of extroversion and introversion are closer to popular usage. Extroverts are characterized primarily by sociability and impulsiveness, but also jocularity, liveliness, quick-wittedness, optimism, and other traits indicative of people who are rewarded for their association with others. Now, Eysenck provide biological basis for this. According to him, if you are extrovert, you have a lower level of cortical arousal, and thus you need higher sensory threshold and to maintain an optimal level of stimulation. That is why extroverts most likely to participate in exciting and stimulating activities such as mountain climbing, social events, and they are more likely to engage in drinking alcohol, smoking, and glamping. and also engage in sexual activities. Introvert, on the other hand, are characterized as quiet, passive, unsociable, careful, reserved, thoughtful, pessimistic, peaceful, sober, and controlled. And they have higher level of cortical arousal, lower sensory threshold, and greater reaction to sensory stimulation. And because introverts have typical low sensory threshold, they tend to maintain the ideal level of stimulation and avoid situations that could overly exciting, like social gathering, skydiving, competitive sports, and other similar activities. So these are the traits for extroversion. If you don't have any of these traits, it means that you have low level of extroversion. Now for the second superfactor, which is the factor N, neuroticism and stability. This superfactor has a strong hereditary component, and people with high neuroticism often have a tendency to overreact emotionally, and they tend to have difficulty returning to a normal state after emotional arousal. According to Eysenck, they commonly exhibit undefined psychological issues like fears and anxieties, in addition to physical symptoms like headaches and backaches. Still, there are individuals who have high score in neuroticism who do not exhibit any serious psychological symptoms. The emotional reactivity in neuroticism is due to having reactive limbic system, including the amygdala and hypothalamus. Also, Eysenck accepted the diathesis stress model, which postulates that some individuals are more susceptible to illnesses because of genetic or acquired weaknesses that makes them more susceptible to illnesses. And some people who have high score in neuroticism are prone to high stress, so they are prone also to any illnesses. IN scorer prone to suffer in neurotic disorder as a result of only lower level of stress. Now here is the two-dimensional scheme depicting several extreme points on Eysenck factor E and N scales. Several people can all score high on N, yet display quite different symptoms depending on their degree of extroversion and introversion. Like for example, for person A, B, and C, the three are have high score in neuroticism but have different level of extroversion. The person A have a low level of extroversion and may characterized by anxiety, depression, phobias, and obsessive compulsion. For person B, average level of extroversion is characterized by neurotic disorder associated with emotional instability. For person C, high level of both extroversion and neuroticism, which probably manifests psychopathic qualities like criminality. The person D and E, on the other hand, are low level of extroversion but different level of neuroticism. Person E characterized as extreme introverts but psychologically stability. And this is the traits for neuroticism. So if you don't have any of these traits, again, you have a low level of neuroticism. Now for psychoticism, high scorer on psychoticism are often egocentric, cold, non-conforming, impulsive, hostile, aggressive, suspicious, psychopathic, and antisocial. Also, people low on psychoticism tend to be altruistic, highly socialized, empathic, caring, cooperative, conforming, and conventional. Now, in diathesis stress model, it suggests that high P scorer are generally more vulnerable to stress than low P scorer. So these are the traits of psychoticism. And again, if you don't have any of these traits, you have low level of psychoticism. For the three-dimensional scheme depicting individual scorers on each of Eysenck major dimensional of personality, The figure shows each of the three factors at right angle with the other two. Each individuals can be evaluated on three separate variables, and the scores obtained can be then plotted in a three-coordinate space. Like for example for person F. F is quite high on superego and somewhat high on neuroticism and near the midpoint of neuroticism and stability scales. Now let's move on to the measuring personality. The four personality inventories that assess Eysenck superfactors that have been developed. First is the MPI or Maudsley Personality Inventory. This test assesses only the factor E and N and yielding some correlation between these two factors. So this first personality inventory, the psychoticism is still not included. Second one is the EPI or Eysenck Personality Inventory, which measures the extroversion and neuroticism independently, but it contains a lie scale to detect faking. The third one is the APQ or Eysenck Personality Question, which published by Hans Eysenck together with Sibyl Eysenck. In this test, the psychoticism scale is included, and because of subsequent criticism of the P scale, it led to another revision. And with this, the Eysenck Questionnaire Revised exists, consists of 24 items for assessment of three fundamental personality traits, which is the psychoticism, extroversion, and neuroticism, and the validity scale, which is the lie scale. Next is the biological basis of personality. Personality factor P, E, and N all have powerful biological determinants, and genetic factors play a dominant part in determining individual differences in personality. The three factors have both antecedent and consequence. The antecedents are genetic and biological, whereas the consequence includes such as experimental, variable, and social behaviors such as criminality, creativity, psychopathology, and sexual behavior. Personality have five major components. As you can see, there are three superfactors are in the middle of the five-step progression from DNA to social behavior, with biological intermediaries and experimental evidence. The first cause of our personality is the genetics. The DNA will go through our limbic system, and it will serve as the basis of our psychometric traits constellation. It determines the level of superfactors, and then the traits will influence how we interact with our environment, which includes conditioning, sensitivity, vigilance, perception, memory, and reminiscence. And this will go through the social behavior, which include the sociability, criminality, creativity, psychopathology, and sexual behavior.
Eysenck's complex model of personality suggests that the psychometric traits of psychotism, extroversion, and neuroticism can combine with one another and with genetic determinants, biological intermediates, and experimental studies to predict a variety of social behaviors, including those that contribute to disease. So, personality as a predictor to Eysenck is that his complex of model personality suggests or suggests that the psychometric traits of psychotism, neuroticism, and extroversion can combine with one another via genetic determinants, biological intermediates, or experimental studies to predict social behaviors, or including those that contribute to disease. So next is personality and behavior. Do Eysenck's three general personalities dimensions predict behavior? According to Eysenck's model, psychotism, extroversion, and neuroticism should be able to predict results of experimental studies as well as social behavior. Recall that Eysenck's theory assumes that extroversion is the product of low critical arousability. So like my group mate Nicole said before, Eysenck in 1995 also hypothesized that psychotism, or the personality P, is related to genius and creativity, but again, the relationship is not simple. Eysenck found evidence that these people that lack of persistence of P scores or psychotism scorers, children with the same creative potential who are also high in psychotism, are able to resist the criticisms of parents and teachers and to emerge as creative adults. Similarly, Eysenck and SBG Eysenck in 1975 reported that both high P scores and high E scores are likely to be troublemakers as children. So, kung taas ka o kuan, like if high ka sa psychotism at high side ka sa extroversion, most likely na pagbata nimo, grabe kay ka kakuan, grabe kay ka gay ulo, like troublemaker kay ka, badlungon, nana. However, parents and teachers tend to regard the extroverted children as charming rogues and to forgive their misdemeanors, whereas the high psychotism scorers are more spiteful, disruptive, and unlovable. Thus, the high extroversion scoring troublemakers tend to grow up into productive adults, while the troublemakers tend to continue. Personality and disease. Can personality factors predict mortality from cancer and cardiovascular diseases? Eysenck devoted much attention to this question. He and David Kissin found that people who scored low on the neuroticism or on personality and tend on the modestly personality inventory tended to suppress their emotion and were much more likely than high neuroticism scorers to receive a later diagnosis of lung cancer. Later, Eysenck came up with Yugoslav physician and psychologist Ronald Gossard to investigate not only the relationship between personality and disease, but also the effectiveness of behavior therapy on prolonging the life of cancer and cardiovascular disease patients. Gossard method had used a short questionnaire and a long personal interview to place people into one of the four group types, which is I will explain on the next slide. Type 1 included people with a hopelessness/helplessness non-emotional reaction to stress. These type of people were much more likely than others to die of cancer. So kaning sila type 1, grabe ilang negative viewing sa ilang sarili. So basically, nas like cancer, and they're like, oh, this is it. I am dead. There's no helping this. Hence why they are much more likely to die of cancer. While type 2, people typically reacted to frustration with anger, aggression, and emotional arousal. These type of people were much more likely to die of heart disease. So type 2 people, unlike type 1 na most likely to die from cancer, kani type 2 sila, they reacted with frustration with anger, aggression, and emotional arousal. These type of people were really, or in a way, let's call kanisla high blood people. They were basically prone to anger or have anger issues, which are more likely to die of heart diseases or cardiovascular diseases. Type 3 people were ambient, shifting from typical reaction of type 1 to the typical reaction of type 2 and then back again. So kaning type 3 were switch lang sila from hopelessness to helplessness to anger and high blood, while type 4 people were regarded as their own autonomy as an important condition to their personal well-being and happiness in the original study in Yugoslavia. Type 3 and type 4 people have very low death rates from either cancer or cardiovascular diseases. So kaning type 4 people, they are gamay na kailang death rates because they regarded their own autonomy as an important condition to their personal well-being and happiness. As Eysenck pointed out, this and other studies on the relationship between personality and disease do not prove that psychological factors cause cancer or heart disease. So, point out ni Eysenck na this and other studies of relationship between personality and disease wala sila ka-prove na psychological factors mo'y maka-cause of cancer and cardiovascular heart diseases. Rather, these diseases are caused by an interaction of many factors. For cardiovascular diseases, this includes like family history, age, gender, ethnic background, hypertension, unfavorable ratio of total cholesterol to high density lipoprotein or HDL, smoking, diet, inactive lifestyle, and etc. So, ang point out ni Esmek na it's not that psychological factors can cause cancer and heart disease, but are caused by many factors like ang history sa family nimo, your age, your gender, your background, hypertension, muhang cholesterol level, smoking, diet, etc. For cancer, the risk includes smoking, diet, alcohol, sexual practices, family history, ethnic background, and personality factors. Eysenck contended that cigarette or smoking alone does not cause cancer or cardiovascular diseases, but when it's combined with stress and personality factors, it helps contribute to death from these two diseases. Eysenck and his associates developed a complex biopsychosocial model for heart disease that includes 11 biological and 7 psychosocial factors. Their research with men in the Republic of Slovenia supported the hypothesis that personality factors interact with variety of biological factors to contribute to heart disease. One interaction was for smoking, neuroticism, and emotional reactivity. That is, high T scores or high psychoticism scores who smoke and who react to stress with anger, hostility, or aggression increase their risk for heart disease. So, so example of this is kanang mga high psychotism scorers na magsigarilyo sila and then mag-react sila stress like lagot, hostility, and aggressive will increase silahang risk for heart attack or heart diseases. So the critique of Eysenck plausibility is moderate to high, the theory can generate much research, organization of knowledge is rated high, it guides action to practitioners but only a little, moderate internal consistency but very precise or parsimony. Next is his concept of humanity, determinism versus free choice. His theory slightly leans on determinism, conscious versus unconscious. His approach leans towards unconscious determinants, teleology versus causality. His theory and approach leans on causality, difference versus similarities. His theory highlights difference over similarity, biological versus social influence. Eysenck very much argued for both nature and nurture, so it's neutral or in the middle ground. Thank you for listening, and that is our report to Eysenck's biological based factor theory. Thank you, and bye bye.